Holy Happy Hour, Batman. I'm Father Ben. I'm an Episcopal priest, co-founder of the All Ports Open Network. And on this show, Holy Happy Hour Batman, I am joined by heroes of the gaming and geek world to talk about life, faith, spirituality, game design philosophy, and the TTRPG industry, and like literally whatever else happens to come up. This is a production. Holy Happy Hour Batman is a production of allportsopen.com. Don't forget, on Monday nights, All Ports Open Network has back-to-back TTRPG content. So after this show, tonight, we will bring our Twitch audience right over to twitch.tv/allportsopen, where the Monday night crew will be kicking off a brand new campaign tonight on the open seas. They're playing a D&D pirate game, I think is correct. So stick around after this show. Don't go anywhere because we're going to be back at 9 at 9 p.m. We're going to take you on over there if you're on Twitch. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, you'll just stick around because the next show will start streaming on Facebook or YouTube. You'll be able to get it right there on those two platforms as well. But if you're on Twitch, we'll raid right over. You won't have to do anything. You'll just sit there and get taken right into the next show. Tonight on Holy Happy Hour Batman, I am joined by internationally renowned game designer Epidiah Ravachol. Epidiah is known for his revolutionary diceless horror game Dread that uses a tumbling tower instead of dice rolling as a mechanic. And if the tower falls, your character dies. Epidiah also creates the adventure fiction and gaming magazine World Without Master and has designed other amazing games like Swords Without Master and Wolfspell. We're going to bring Epidiah on in just a few minutes and talk about all of that and, like I said, whatever else comes up. Let's see. Last housekeeping items before we continue on with our show tonight. Please note that we consolidated at All Ports Open all of our streams down so that, with the exception of this show, all our other stream shows will from now on take place at Twitch TV/AllPortsOpen. So if you are a follower of The Worst Days, which was our old stream show for Apon Games, you're going to instead go to All Ports Open here on Twitch. So make sure you follow that channel. We have a brand new Friday night horror show. So if you're here because you like horror, and that's why you're here tonight, we have a brand new horror show called The Nightmare Clubhouse. The first episode was last Friday. You can watch it anytime on YouTube or at allportsopen.com. The Nightmare Clubhouse takes deep dives into discussing horror movies. So, like I said, if you're here tonight to see Epidiah, you probably like the horror genre. It's a really cool cast. I highly recommend coming back next Friday to check it out. This Friday, however, on the All Ports Open stream, me and Josh and Chris from the Monday Night crew, we're going to be talking about the movie Dune on the stream Dwelling Upon. That's this coming Friday at 9 p.m. We've got stream content every night of the week, so if you go to allportsopen.com, you can see our lineup and our schedule. Next week here on Holy Happy Hour, I hope you'll come back and join me because we're having a special Delinquent Comics takeover. My cast for my Masks actual play show, Delinquent Comics, they're going to come on the show. We're going to be joined by Caleb Sunstead, who was the GM for the Sounds Like Crows podcast. He guest GM'd our Death of Burnout Part 1 and Part 2 arc. He's going to be here. My cast is going to be on the show, and we're going to be talking about, or at least some of them, and we're going to be talking about the Death of Burnout and Delinquent Comics in general. So a little bit of a departure from our normal formula here on Holy Happy Hour, but it should be super fun. So come back next Monday night, same bat time, same bat channel for that. So it is happy hour here at Holy Happy Hour Batman, and that means that we have a beverage on the screen that you can see. I create a cocktail every week inspired by my guest or my guest's games or whatever. I am a huge fan of the game Dread. I thought long and hard about what kind of cocktail I would create inspired by the game Dread. I wanted to get it right. I labored over it, and so I was really just not sure what to do. But I finally came up with this drink called That Dreaded Tower. I wanted to make a tower drink with something layered. And so this is what we came up with. So you can see the ingredients here. It's basically a 3-layer drink. So what you're going to do is you're going to make it sort of goes in 3 steps. The first step is you're going to take lush grenadine and apple brandy, stir that to mix together and chill. and you're gonna take a highball glass, fill it with ice, chill the highball glass first. That helps with if you've never made a layered drink, layered cocktail or layered shot, chilling your glass helps. Having a bartending spoon that you can kind of pour your liquor over or your drink over to help like soften its sort of blow as it enters the glass, like that helps layer the drink. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna start with the mix of lush grenadine and apple brandy to create like a red layer. And then you're gonna mix lemon juice and ginger ale again separately in a separate glass with ice to get them mixed up, and then pour that into your highball glass as the next layer. It's like a yellow layer, and then this drink uses something called Averna, which is a Italian aperitif, as the top layer, and so you're gonna pour that on as like a dark, really dark top layer. So what you should end up having is 3 really distinct layers, a blood red layer at the bottom, I hope it's supposed to be blood red, like a yellow layer in the middle, and then like a real dark layer at the top. And then garnish it with something spooky, like a radish eye. You can learn how to make those online, or something other fun, horror-themed garnish. Yeah, so like basically you can end up with like a tower of cocktail, like 3 different sort of flavors. The apple and the ginger kind of go really well together, I think. The Averna also, I think, mixes in nicely. And because it's like a layered cocktail, like the drink kind of changes as you drink it. And so, like I said, I have a little note there at the bottom of the directions. I don't know if you can read it. It says, drink carefully with rigid fingers, looking over your shoulder, checking the door. With a sense of dread, perhaps, as you drink this cocktail. So that's my drink I made, that dreaded tower. If you do make it, remember my rule here at Holy Happy Hour Batman is that if you make one of the cocktails that I have invented on the show, you have to let me know what you thought, good or bad. Just reach out and let me know that you did. So, okay, well, that's our cocktail for this week. If you want the recipe, there's a recipe card. If you go to @BenjaminWallace on Twitter, it should already be. I probably tweeted it out right now because I have that set up to do it automatically for me by the power of the internet. So you can get that recipe card literally right now just by going to Twitter @BenjaminWallace on Twitter, or momentarily if you don't see it yet. And you can have that. I'll also tweet it again after the show at some point when I sort of tweet out the links with the final version of this video, that recipe card. It's a fun Halloween drink. I know we're kind of at the end of Halloween here. We caught the spooky season by like one day. I think it still counts. We can ask Epidiah in a second whether it still counts. But all right, so without further ado, let's go ahead. I'm going to bring Epidiah onto the show. Epidiah Ravachol, welcome to Holy Happy Hour Batman. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So what do you think? It's the day after Halloween. Does this still count as spooky season?
I mean, yeah. So there's a very... spooky season goes well into the dead of winter. Okay. Christmas is known for ghost stories. Famously, we do the... I was going to say Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but that's because my brain is all messed up. The Dickens one. Christmas Carol.
Oh, Christmas Carol.
Yeah. And, that's something that, it's a ghost story, but that's part of a tradition that existed even before that iconic work came out. And so I like to think of winter as like the whole spooky season. Like fall is the beginning of it, but it pushes up further and further. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's my official, if I have any say in the matter.
Yeah. Well, you I think mentioned to me that this is for you in your household. I think you said it's wolf spell season. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this is not. Well, departing from where I thought we might go at the beginning of this conversation, I'm curious about that. Can you tell us why is the season wolf spell season for your household?
Well, this is so I don't know how many years ago, but a few. When I first started publishing Worlds Without Master, I had done one issue, and then I was like, oh no, I have to do another. Like that's how sequential things work. And I was working on my story for the second issue, which ended up being this tale of these the magazine itself is sword and sorcery fiction. So I had the story of these two sisters who are adventurers, but kind of like near the end of their adventuring life, like getting ready to settle down or retire. And they come home where they found that their brother and his family have been involved in a feud, and they end up having to. Their brother ends up getting killed, and they take two different sides, make two different oaths about what to do about that. One of them wants to avenge him, and the other promises not to let the feud go on, because feuds just go on forever if somebody doesn't let it go. And in order to get past their oaths, they had to transform themselves into wolves, because they were like, well, the only way to solve this problem is if this person dies of natural causes, like being out in the woods and the wolves get them. So they turn into wolves. And as I was writing that story, I was also trying to come up with a game that I was going to, because I put a piece of fiction in a game, one of my own pieces of fiction, and a game that doesn't have to be my own, but quite often ends up being one of my own in each issue of Worlds. And the game design part of my brain was like, why did you give this story to the fiction writing part of my brain? I deserve to work with this material. And that's where Wolfspell came out. So that original issue was published in November. And then like every November, it just was like such a part of my life during that time, because I was working on it in all these different ways, that I just think of November as the Wolfspell season. That's even though when we ran the Kickstarter, I think it was in a January, but it was still winter. Winter's sure. Wolfspell.
Yeah. So I see you've got your beautiful like album version of it back there. Yeah.
Hold on. If I could do the whole.
Yeah, do it.
This trifold.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
I don't know if I can.
Yep, you're good. We can see mostly. Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah.
That's Shell Khan. They're the artist that I originally, when I wrote the story, I was trying to figure out what artists to get, and they were top of my list, and I contacted them, and they were like, yeah, I can do that. And the work they did for that story was so amazing that I knew that when it came time to actually put the game separate from the magazine, that they were who I wanted to work with, and they did an amazing job, just an absolutely amazing job.
Yeah, it's so good. The art is very compelling. It's really cool. Well, before we get too far away from the beginning of the show and the cocktail, so I like I said, I really labored over. I was like, of all the cocktails I've made on the show, I definitely of all the people I've had on the show, like of all the games we've talked about, Dread is hands down like the one I have played the most times, and has awesome. Like a special place in like my gaming life. Like I love Dread. The people I play with love Dread. We do Dread very regularly. I run a game night on Saturday nights for like a club like out of my church, and like we've played Dread many times there.
That's awesome.
So I needed to get the cocktail right. So I don't know. I don't know. What do you think?
It sounds amazing. I had to look up. Is it Verna? Is that what it's called?
Averna, yeah. The Italian aperitif, or Averna grappa, depends on who you ask. Yeah.
I'm I accidentally opened up looking for it. I accidentally opened up the Twitch, which showed me my face not mirrored, which threw me off for just a second there. Speaking of horror, it sounds really interesting. I like a wide variety of foods. I'm a very I enjoy different flavors and tastes, but for some reason, like I really enjoy weird drinks. Like if you're gonna be like, you should try this, it may sound disgusting or it may not. I don't know. I would prefer that to be in a drink form than in a meal form, which is weird. So, but I don't know about weird. I don't know if that's weird. Maybe everyone's like that, but like there's something about flavors I'm not used to. I enjoy drinking them more than I do eating them, and I've not had that. But it sounds like a really like the description made it sound like a spicy in that sort of licorice kind of cinnamon way,
Exactly.
kind of.
Yeah.
And I'm getting up there. I enjoy my Spice Dots candy, like the old people kind of. So yeah, I think this is the yeah. And also, if it looks disgusting, I mean, as far as like having the red, I don't know what the actual colors would end up being, but like the I'm down for that too. I really.
So it's kind of got like a nice like it's got the red at the bottom, which is different than like a real dark red at the top, and then like kind of like a yellowy mixture in the middle. So yeah, it's cool, kind of a cool layer. And if you add like I said, if you add like a fake eyeball or something on top, I think it would look real creepy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in. I am in.
I also I meant to say this and I forgot to when I was introducing the drink. Like I was reading up about like you can get powdered dry ice. And then if you sprinkle that on top of a cocktail, it'll like, do the whole dry ice, like billowy thing. And as long as you let it finish, it completely evaporates. And then, it's not hazardous at all. You just got to be careful handling it. But so another cool way to like do a spooky garnish. But so for our audience, when we were talking about whether or not I could do a cocktail inspired by Dread, I found out that Epidiah is vegan because you asked me, could it be vegan? And so I don't think this has come up on Holy Happy Hour, but I am almost entirely vegan. My household is vegan. We eat vegan at home. So like the confession, my wife doesn't let me get away with saying that I'm vegan because she is 100% vegan. I eat vegan like 99.9% of the time, but because of that, like sometimes I'll eat dairy if I'm out or eggs or whatever. So she doesn't let me get away with saying I'm a vegan.
We've got a reverse of that situation where I'm the vegan one, and when we eat at home, again, 99.9 repeating percent of the time, it's vegan stuff. But my wife is not specifically vegan; she just eats a lot of vegan food, and with me, the majority of the food she eats is vegan. I should put it that way. And then when she goes out, she'll enjoy something that is not vegan.
There you go.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like almost all of the meals I eat are vegan, like almost entirely. We don't buy anything for home that isn't vegan. But how long, so I wanted to, I don't know how much our audience cares about veganism, but I do. So I wanted to talk about it. How long have you been vegan?
Since 98. So.
Wow.
It's 23 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
So, yeah, it's I mean, like there's when you first go vegan, there's like you keep track of it, just like when you're a kid, you keep track of your birthday. Like now I don't know my actual age. I could do the math. I have to do it every year, but like I don't it's no, I don't. Anyways, so and it's getting to be that way too. After my veganism was old enough to drink, I was like, okay, I don't have to keep track of this anymore.
Right, sure. So it's a lot different being a vegan now though than it was in 1998.
Yeah. We're in the glory days now. Just even over the past 5 years, but I had. So when I went vegan, this may be of no interest to anybody, but let's do it. Let's talk.
Yeah.
I was living in Wisconsin, which, cheese capital of the Midwest, if not out this way, the Vermont people would argue that they're the cheese capital. And I'm sure on the West Coast, California thinks they're the cheese. I have no horse in that race, though. I don't care who's the cheese capital or whatever. But it was pretty bare. Like none of the restaurants. Like if you went to a restaurant, you'd have to explain in detail like what you're allowed and what you're not allowed. Or there wasn't like a vegan menu or vegan items on the menu or whatever. Most people wouldn't recognize the term at the time, at least where I was. And then around 2004 4 or 5, I moved to New York City, and I just fell into a crowd of nerds there. There were a bunch of us that were all into things, and I went to a picnic, which was in and of itself kind of this scary experience, because I went to this picnic with all of these New York nerds about a week or two after I moved there. I didn't know any of them, haven't met any of them, didn't even see pictures of any of them, just like we've online set it up. And I walked into Prospect Park, and I walked up to a group of people that I thought was them, and just was like, please don't take this the wrong way, but are you the nerds? I just need to know.
Excuse me, are you the nerds?
Are you the nerds? And it turns out they were. And 2 of them were at the very beginning of their careers as being like best-selling vegan cookbook authors.
Oh, wow.
So I got to meet them, and got to, as this sort of vegan food renaissance began, I was like at one of the epicenters of it, and I got to play test recipes and cupcake books and things like that, and it blew my mind. And I went back to visit home in the Midwest, where they were like, would you like a vegan cupcake? And they hand me like a bran muffin, and I'm like, but no, nowadays with like things like Beyond Meat and the Impossible Burger, and it's just I've been vegan long enough. Like a lot of times people ask me like, what do you recommend for like a fake meat or a fake cheese? And my response is usually, I don't know what tastes like meat or cheese anymore. It's been too long. I can't tell you what's a good substitute, but I'll tell you what I enjoy eating. Because there are things now that exist that I find amazing, that didn't way back when.
Even from when I went vegan, like in 2008, so like, like a decade after you did, like even when I went vegan, between then and now, it's just so different.
Yeah.
It's like just like completely different environment. Well, we can be old and curmudgeon-y and be like, you don't know what it was like when we went vegan. Like,
right, guys.
You modern vegans have it easy. You don't.
You probably never even eaten a lentil loaf.
Exactly. Well, I do promise. So I want to talk a little bit about something else too. But if folks do really want to hear us talk about Dread,
no problem.
We are going to. So people stick around, and if you in the chat, please. But before that, I did want to just sort of talk about your sort of, I always call it the origin story.
Okay.
So like your TTRPG origin story. Like, when did you first play role-playing games? How did you get introduced to playing, to the hobby, to the industry, that kind of stuff?
So when I was in the 6th grade, I think, so that's like 12, 13, that area there, or just before the 6th grade, I moved from, my whole family was living in Ohio, and we moved from Ohio to Wisconsin. And that's about, that was like an 8-hour trip between the two places, and took it a little rough. You're a kid, and you're leaving all your friends behind. And when we went back to visit, I have this very distinct memory of going back to visit and hanging out with my old friends. Like, this is just like a year later, but it's an important year. It's the early teens year.
Yeah.
And this is, I'm going to get like weirdly personal. And when we went back, I brought my teddy bear, because I thought like, this is like one of the ways we played. We also had G.I. Joe. We also had Star Wars figurines and all that. But, like, we all played pretend or whatever. And I showed up, and my friend was like, no, actually, he had a surprise for me. He invited, this was a good friend that lived in the neighborhood I used to live in. He brought a friend of ours from school to, like, as a surprise guest friend. And the thing about this kid that we knew from school is that he had an older brother. Like, everyone in my neighborhood, like, I was amongst the oldest generation. It was all a bunch of young families. But older brothers are the gateways to heavy metal posters,
Yeah.
horror videos,
Uh-huh.
pet tarantulas, and in this case, the TSR's Conan the Role Playing Game.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was like mid '80s, and we only made characters for it. I didn't really know Conan that well, other than like through osmosis. I hadn't read any of the Conan stories. Oh, I probably read some Conan comics at that point, but I don't even think I had seen the movie with Arnold. And we made characters, and the concept of being able to be these characters, to get into this fantasy world and become these heroes, just infected my brain, so that when we took that 8-hour trip back from Ohio to Wisconsin, I didn't have the rule book. I didn't know how the game ran or anything like that. I just had to play it with my younger brother, who was in the car with me. So I forced him to make characters with rules I was making up on the spot and ran him through some adventure that I was coming up with while we were driving back home.
It's amazing.
And then from there, that was I just sought it out whenever I could find it. The first rule book I ever owned was the expert set for D&D, which doesn't explain how to play the game. It explains how to continue playing the game after you get past level 3. So that was another one that was I bought it, and we had this artifact, and it's just a bunch of us hanging around, reading it over, trying to come up with a game that matches what this is the extension of. So
that's really funny.
Yeah.
Well, I like that your origin story for role-playing is also your origin story for designing role-playing games.
Yeah.
At the same time. What was the first role-playing game you formally designed? Like the first game you wrote?
Oh, the first one. Well, the first. Oh, there's some interesting answers to that. So the first one ever published was Dread.
Sure.
And that was we published that in 2005. But before that, in high school with some friends, we put some games together. There was some that were more role-playing game than other. We had a mecha one that we were all obsessed with Robotech. So we wanted to have that. And then we had a game called You Die Now, which was less of a role-playing game and more of a miniatures war game.
Okay, sure.
And less of that and more of a we're really bored, and that game had a rule that said every character healed a certain amount of hit points, like a D6 hit points or whatever, at midnight every night, but not at midnight in the game world, at midnight in the real world.
Uh-huh.
And there had been battles that were decided by that. It was just got past midnight and everyone's like, I get more hit points. Hold on, before we do anything else. And there was, for 2 classes of mine in junior high, I wrote role-playing games as class projects. We did
Really?
Yeah, we did a Greek mythology unit in a social studies class. And so I wrote, it's essentially like a choose your own adventure, handwritten in a spiral notebook. That I turned in. I think I got a good grade on that and thought, well, I could keep doing this. And then I made one for a French class that I was in, and it was horrible. I was demonstrating no ability to speak or understand French, and my teacher just had no idea what I was
trying to get away with.
Yeah, exactly. So it was just no, this is not good.
I can imagine that bore out in the grade that you received.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
Yeah, that's funny though. It's the first time I've ever heard of someone turning in a role-playing game submission as a class project for school.
Yeah, it was fun. I even got to illustrate it.
Cool.
could sit down with the colored crayons or colored pencils and draw three-headed dogs and I think I'm trying to remember, like I drew a dragon, even though it's not really a Greek myth thing. I just remember very distinctly.
You just needed a dragon.
Yeah, just needed a dragon.
It's a role-playing game. It needs a dragon, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, how about for horror? Like, what's your origin story for horror? When did you get into the genre? Like, what was your entry?
Well, I mean, that kind of follows a similar path to, I had this friend who had an older brother. There's also this, when I'm a scaredy cat. Like I enjoy being scared. I think there's like sometimes people get, they misunderstand what it means to be a horror fan and think that horror fans just aren't scared by things and that's why they're able to enjoy it or whatever. But when I was a kid would sit alone in a basement in the dark and freak myself out because that was just, well, we didn't have the internet. So, I mean, like there
was really not that much to do.
Yeah,
we didn't have the internet, so we sat around in the dark in the basement.
Yeah. I remember when Return of the Living Dead came out and they did a radio ad for it. And there was this moment in the radio ad where in the movie, I don't know if you've seen it or if you're familiar with it, but
I'm familiar, but I've not seen I haven't seen Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah. So Return of the Living Dead is the fake, not fake, is a different sequel to Night of the Living Dead. Like it was somebody who was involved. I don't know the technical details, but they're like, it's meant to be like a different kind of sequel. It came out in the 80s.
If that's the one, actually, maybe I have seen this one. My friend Blaine's in the chat, so he might remember whether this is. We saw one that was not actually a Romero movie that had The Living Dead in the title in a theater, and it was real campy, like really bad and really corny. And I did see, if that's the same movie, I actually have remarkably seen that movie.
So this. In this movie, zombies can talk. The living dead can talk, which is lovely.
I've seen this one.
Yeah. And they move really fast. There's a lot of things. It's where the idea that the living dead want to eat brains comes from.
Okay.
And it's straight out of this movie. They go around saying brains. And there's this scene where some of the survivors have one of the dead on this autopsy table.
Yes, I remember this. Yes.
Yes. And they ask her, why do you eat brains? Yes. And she says, to ease the suffer of dying, of feeling what it's like to rot in the grave. I heard that, like, they played that clip on the radio.
Okay.
As like a promo. I heard that, like, I'm a kid. I don't remember how old I was, but like, I'm a little kid who had to go home. I was like literally leaving my friend's house at night to walk home in the dark. And I hear that, and like, not only is it scary because this is way out where, like, we're in a neighborhood where you could walk from house to house, but like we're surrounded by nothing but fields. There were like no street lights to speak of. It was just pitch black at night, which is great for stargazing, but horrible if you've just heard this radio in your ad and you're trying to get home. And it's like that, and then when I get home, sitting there thinking, wait, when you die, do you just rot in, like, do you just feel that existential fear and horror kind of got into me? Mm-hmm. So I have these very vivid memories of horror when I was a kid, scaring me, like a haunted hayride in which like the teenagers did like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre tableau, and then here in school the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was based on a real story, and just like all of that, but then it wasn't again until I guess junior high roughly when I started getting into role-playing games again that like I had a friend of mine who had us all over for a sleepover, and for the sleepover he wanted to watch Nightmare on Elm Street. And it just, like, that movie terrified me, just absolutely terrified me. And then we followed it up with Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, which is, I really love that film, but it's a completely different film and it's far goofier. And there was something that clicked in me that made me realize that I could like, because from when I had that radio ad to that point, I was avoiding horror. Like, it was scary to me. It was something that I kept poking at, like a scab you kept picking or whatever. But it was at that moment when I was like, wait a minute, I could make a thing of this. I could watch more of these films. If I could make it through this night in which I learned about Freddy Krueger, the man who comes to you in your sleep and kills you. If I could make it through this night, then I'll be able to make it through whatever is ahead. And so, yeah, that's sort of like where my horror origin story. But it really, like, once we turned, when we started making Dread, we weren't, in the beginning, it wasn't a horror game. And by in the beginning, I mean like the first 20 minutes of like, we came upon the Jenga mechanic, and I was, we were kind of flipping through ideas of what to do with it. And then when we hit upon horror, it was like, oh yeah, of course, this is a horror mechanic. That's what's happening. And then I just rolled up my sleeves and really got into the genre hardcore. I mean, I had things to say before then, but I really wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing and what I was saying. So at that point, it became, that's one of my favorite things about game design, is when you get, like when I did Wolfspell, I was like, well, now it's my job to know about wolves. So I get to watch documentaries about wolves. I get to read about wolves, and it's kind of awesome. It's just like, it's a wonderful side effect of having that job.
So it's interesting to me that the tower came first.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me, because when I think about, I mean, the tower is so much of what makes that game so good is because I have a friend who has run my absolute favorite Dread GM. And that's not a slight to anyone else who may be watching this who's run Dread for me, who's awesome at it too. But my friend Josh Hearn is he's a Baptist pastor in Virginia, and he is an incredible Dread GM. Has given me some of the most memorable game experiences playing Dread. But he's talked about the way the tower becomes like a totem of Dread, right? It becomes this like symbol. And so when he runs, he actually likes to have it for a couple of reasons, but instead of the tower being in the middle of the table that we're playing at, he will have it on a smaller table off to the side, which has two functions. There's the function one of like, it's less likely that anyone's going to accidentally knock it over, which I guess is its own source of dread. But it also means that like it takes on almost its own life as being like, it's right over there as this like endless totem of waves of fear coming off of it, like, dread coming off of it. Like, it's not right in the middle of us. It's just slightly off the side. Something about relocating it, like, just does something. So it's interesting to me that that the tower came first, because like the game so delves into that one aspect of horror, right? The aspect of dread. And I'm wondering if there's like a moment when you realize like that specifically was going to be like the way this game did horror. Like, yeah.
So, the origin story of Dread, I think, kind of goes back to just this experiment where we were trying to write a game without numbers. We were because numbers have been such a, your strength and your intelligence and your wisdom and your dexterity are all number based. For some reason, between 3 and 18. And it had just been so ingrained in how things work. And of course, there are games that find ways to go around that. And I remember at the time, Fate wasn't out, but Fudge was, and we played a little bit of that, and that's fun stuff. But it's numbers in disguise. I've come around now. I've since come to math and really enjoy math now, and everything is numbers in disguise now. Everything's triangles in disguise. Honestly, if you really, but I don't. We're not getting it. Anyways, the point is, so that's what we were doing. That's why the questionnaire, right? Instead of having stats, you had this questionnaire. Although, like but the sort of kind of get to the answer that, like, we knew right away, not right away, but like moments after we came up with that idea that it was going to be a horror thing. It just, like, the very first idea wasn't horror, and then within the next half hour we're like, wait, hold on, it's going to be horror. And then the first play test, I was talking about this a little bit earlier this month. I'd set that ridiculous challenge for myself to tell a different dread fact every day of of October, which I have no idea. Some of them are just more like, this is a thing about how Epi likes horror and not about dread. But anyways, in our first play test of it, we had, the questionnaire was like 100 questions long, which I'm not kidding. And we just immediately realized what a bad idea that was. But we also had these rules for dice that you would roll. And I don't exactly remember how the dice worked, except that one of them was like the husk die, which had something to do with like the condition your character was in, and the other was some sort of atmospheric die. And those ideas disappeared from dread and disappeared from my consciousness. And then I only recently realized, thinking back on it, that like they've reappeared in Swords Without Master and Wolfspell and like some of my other games that I do. But when we sat down to play that game and we put the tower in the middle of the table, and I was running it and I had my rules for the different dice out in front of me, and we started playing, we never touched the dice. No one even thought of them. That first session, we had a wonderful time. There's like, we learned not to put your candles too close to the Jenga tower. That was an important fact. It was, I remember I had these speakers for my computer. My computer was a desktop thing that we had like 2 rooms away, and had these really bad tinny speakers on them. And I had just put a whole bunch of music on the computer that would be spooky or whatever. And there was this one song that I had that starts off with this bass line and then has the singer he's this guy who just moans like in a horror movie kind of way. But because the speakers are so bad and so far away, you couldn't hear the bass line. So just as it would switch songs, you would hear nothing. And then you would hear this like that. And it got to the point where the players, every time a song stopped, if somebody was going to pull, they just step away from the Jenga tower. They're like, I'm just going to wait and hear what this next song is before I don't want this guy to start. So, but I'm way off track there. The point is that like, that tower dominated it. Like we sat down with a bunch of rules that we never even touched. And so we just scrapped them. And we spent time, we worked on those rules. I don't remember how much time, I don't remember how invested I was, but like, it was very clear from that first play test that the simplicity of it was one of its strengths. That was another thing I got to say over this past, was that like when Dread came, that was in 99, I think, when we, like the fall of 99, when we were first designing Dread. And when it finally came out in 95, one of the people that bought it had been running an ongoing Dread campaign, had never played Dread with me, had just played Dread with someone who had played Dread with me. And like the fact that the rules were that transmittable without any text, there was no, there's no rule book or anything. I was like, at the time I was like, oh no, are we like, we don't have a marketable product here. People will just take it and remember how to play it, and that's all. It'll be like a tic-tac-toe, or you don't need rules for You don't need a rules book for tic-tac-toe or rock, paper, scissors or anything like
Sure.
that. But,
Well, yeah, I do think that there's something to be said for like understand reading the book in order to understand the game. I mean, like your
yeah.
advice about horror, advice about how to use the tower, how to GM. Because I do think it's more about like. So okay, so here's a fun Ben Dread fact, which is Dread is the only role playing game I've gotten to play with my mother.
Oh, wow.
So I got to play Dread with my sister, I suppose. I got to play Dread with my mom and my sister and other people in our Saturday game club. And one of the things I love about Dread is that you don't have to know anything about how to play a role playing game to sit down and play Dread, and you can go from 0 to 100
Yeah.
instantly, and just like and so for players, like the players really don't need to see a book ever to play Dread, right? But I think to run Dread, like I found it extremely helpful to read the book to like really learn like how do you run this game well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like that's one of the challenges of any game text. Cause in order for your game to work, if you have a GM, you're going to need someone to run it. And even if you don't have a GM, you're going to need a group of people
Yeah.
to facilitate it. And your text needs to not just explain how to do that, but to explain it in such a way to instill confidence in that person. Otherwise, they're not going to do it. Like if they don't think they can do it. And, for a large swath of us, we got into the hobby because we're like, yeah, let's give it a shot. Let's see what this is like. We're willing to make that leap, but it's not guaranteed. Your audience isn't going to just want to try new things all the time or whatever. So yeah, I do think that there's something to that, having that text to kind of walk you through it, give you something to fall back on, and just even if it's just sort of letting you look a little bit into the state of mind, if you will, of the designer.
Yeah, for sure.
So that you can second guess them when you have to, because that'll come up as well.
Sure. Well, so
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I think about running Dread that I've found is that sometimes I've had it's the pacing, like getting the pacing right as a GM, and like kind of like when to push people towards pulling, and like the kind of the dance of that, like like how to walk that line of like pushing a little too hard or that and I find the advice in the book helpful because I do think that's one of the challenges of running Dread is like how to do that pacing well.
It's interesting because it's been a couple decades now, almost. It's about 16 years since it was released, but and I've seen Dread. Like I definitely was when we designed it. I was like, this is how it has to be played. This is the I know the one true way. And I've now I've had the pleasure of playing in other people's games. I've people have been like, hey, do you want to play your own game? And I'm like, yeah, that would be a delight. I'd love to give that a shot. And seeing how people do that and find different ways to address things like the pacing, when to act, call for pulls and whatever. It's been kind of an eye-opening experience because it's something that I'm really curious about now as far as for me, one of the sort of fundamental parts of Dread is the way what the player is doing is an act of defiance, right? So and what I mean by that is like the GM, the host of the game, kind of can just say, no, you can't do that. And if you want to, over there in the corner is that tower. Like you have to face your fear here to do that. And so it puts it in the player's hand to just say, like, I don't like what's happening here. I'm going to stop it from happening. Or, the heroic sacrifice, the blaze of glory rules, where you could just be like, you know what, we're gonna end this right now. Not the game, but the whatever's going on. There's these moments because I talk about it in the book itself. It says it's a game of horror and hope, and like those are the things. Like there's these moments where it's both a horror game, but it comes from an adventure game background, so you have this chance at heroics. You have this chance to stick it to someone, and that someone is often embodied by your host, right? Like that's the person that's running it, because they're the ones who are saying, no, you can't do that unless you pull. So that's been sort of my style, not necessarily an antagonistic host, but as like providing this sort of resistance for the players to rise up against as they play. And I have seen people now, and having played in these games where people take a more I'm trying to think of like a good way to instead of like that, the cues about the pacing and the tone coming from that realm, theirs is coming from the sort of idea like now is a time when things are going to get more spooky or get more creepy, so now you should pull. And that's a legitimate way to play the game as well. It's just not one that I was playing all the time. And so I'm learning about how people are doing these sort of like, in those games, it's more like the players are playing characters that are experiencing this story, but I think the tower feels more of like that soundtrack part of the movie, or and I mean the tower fills all of these different roles in different no matter how you run it, like it's just going to have like this influence that your friend you were talking about having like the
totem of dread.
Yeah. It's good, but the question is, how do you invoke it? Like where you and I think that it's kind of interesting. It's been long enough now, because almost always when I had to deal with dread, it was a matter of selling the game, which meant that I had to run a scenario that had to play in a certain amount of time, had to give often in a very crowded convention center. So I couldn't so I would do like a zombie thing because that was easier to do. And you can play off of the fears that people already have of being overcrowded by everyone. So it just like, it kind of, I ended up, when you design a game, you have like this, your brain kind of explodes with all the possibilities. And then when you start selling the game, you refine them all down to like in a single experience that you can reliably produce over and over and over again to a large swath of people in the hopes of getting the most out of that experience. And that's not the best thing for you, right? Like you end up experiencing the game in kind of a lesser way. You don't get to it's not as playful. It's just so
but I mean, like, what's interesting about that is that while that's true for you as the game designer turned seller, what you do get to do then is, in hope, people who then buy the game, they take it home, and then they have all these playful experiences and memories. You'll never get, unless you talk to someone like me who plays the game, right? You talk to a fan or whatever, someone who's played the game. Aside from that, like, you'll never know the stories told. I mean, that's something that's wild to me about game design in general. It's like as someone creating a tabletop role playing game and never knowing the stories that have been
Yeah.
created by this thing that you made. It's like being the grandfather of the stories, but you never see them, or a great
Yeah.
great great grandfather. You never see your descendant. But like that's so fascinating to me. Is that what's that like for you to like know that these stories get birthed and you don't even know them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like, okay, so this reminds me of a thing that happened, and another. I'm gonna say 10 years ago, maybe not 10 years ago, but it could be like 10. Anyways, within the past decade, there was a horror convention down your way. Actually, I think it was almost. Well, I can't remember the name of the town. I think it's Jersey.
Okay.
But it was like on the border.
Sure.
And I went down there with Vincent Baker and Brett Gillen, and we were going to what is specifically a horror convention, not a role-playing convention, not like a fandom convention where everything is kind of combined, but this was a horror convention. Monster Mania might be what it was called. And we were going to have a table. We did have a table there where we were going to sell our games. I had Dread, Brett had Final Girl, and Vincent had Murderous Ghosts. And I think we had like a couple other horror games from other people.
Okay.
And we were just going to be like, hey, maybe we can break into the wider horror audience. And then that weekend financially was an absolute failure. But it was the funnest failure I've ever had. I know I've had some pretty fun failures. I don't know if it's, but I did not sell. I don't think I sold a single Dread game.
Wow.
I remember like having this experience. Like Dread is usually pretty good at conventions because you put that Jenga tower out, people stop.
Yeah.
Even at the horror convention, they stopped to play Jenga, and they're like, "Why is this here?"
Right.
And I started explaining it, and you start telling them about like you're in a clearing next to some cornfields, and the corn is moving, but it's moving against the wind, and something seems to be coming towards you. Like, what do you? And you run them through like a little thing, and their eyes light up. They're having fun pulling the block. They're telling me what their character's doing. They're just like absolutely into it. And then you put this book in their hand and you say, now that's $24.
Yeah.
And they like the person in the booth next to me is selling them like 6 DVDs for that price, right? Like it's not like, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Plus I just told them how to play the game, right? Like it doesn't. So
they're like, I have a Jenga tower at home. I'm good.
Yeah. And so we, the whole weekend, there was a lot of things that happened over the weekend where we started to understand what was going on. We started to see that like they didn't have a hole in their heart, the shape of role playing games that like I do, like and so there were all these other sort of games that they were playing, even if they weren't specifically called games, that they were enjoying. We saw these little girls. It was really kind of interesting seeing the younger horror fans, but they were running around pretending they were being chased by people dressed like Michael Myers, even though these people dressed like Michael Myers are just walking through the convention like they normally do. And so that was fun, and seeing that. But there was this one experience where Vincent, these 2 young ladies came up and asked about our games, and Vincent was telling them about Murderous Ghosts. And that was a 2-player game, so it just seemed like a good fit. And he had them just open it up to the page and start reading the instructions and just doing what it says. And the game, if you're not familiar, is you play. One of you plays the Murderous Ghost, the other plays a urban spelunker, somebody who is illegally going into old urban ruins and like looking around or whatever. And the urban spelunker is in the basement of an old hospital or something, so it's already a little spooky. And it's sort of like 2 different choose your own adventure books where you read through and then you get to a point you have to ask the other what happens next or whatever. There's nothing scripted in it. Like there's little prompts and things, but it isn't, And the one playing the murderous ghost describes an old gurney there that has some cockroaches on it, and the other one just asks, "Are they real cockroaches?" And the murderous ghost said, "Most of them are, but some aren't." And we were like, "What's going on?" Right? Like that's such a like an amazing detail. Then they had to leave, so they put the book down and they went somewhere else. The next morning, when the con opened up, they came running to our booth, holding money out to buy that game. And I want to know, like, they must have spent that entire night wondering, what's the deal with the cockroaches? Yeah, right, like, what's the deal with the, like, where some of them are fake and some of them aren't. And that, you know, like, that gets into that thing. Like, you don't know what's going on inside people's, but it was just this wonderful thing to see that. And I think it might have been one of 2 sales we made that entire weekend, but it was really cool. One of the most memorable sales I'd ever seen, because you could just feel it. Like, they were like, I need to know what happens next. I need to, you know, the fiction sunk its teeth into them.
That's so cool. I would think that I would have expected Murderous Ghosts to do at least okay at a convention like that, because it is a party game. So at least, like, you know, it's got that going for it.
I don't remember, but I don't think, because like quite often they could do like Murderous Ghosts where they play it in front of a whole hall, like you know, and I don't think they had that situation at this convention, so that may have in fact helped it out quite a bit. I don't know, like that could have helped it out. It was really interesting to see just how, like, it just wasn't a product that people were interested in a way for them to participate in the genre. And it kind of makes some sense too. Like, when you look at the state of horror role-playing games versus horror, the genre, it's very different. We're still there's plenty of overlap, right? But there's still like this sort of adventure feel that exists that is in most horror role-playing games. And I don't want to paint them all with the same brush. And in fact, I can't say most anymore. I like to say that there are 200,000 new role-playing games published every year. Now, that fact is probably not true, but it lets me off the hook. I don't have to know what all of them are. And I can no longer say that the majority of them are. Because if you go to, like, say, if you go to itch and you just search for new physical games, like, the breadth of them and how many of them, it's just, there's just no way to know, like, what's actually. But, like, for the longest time, D&D and the adventure stuff that comes out of D&D had this vice-like grip on the hobby, and for good and for ill. Like I actually quite enjoy that. I like having adventure, you know, like horror adventures, you know. But I also am a horror enthusiast, and I enjoy horror stuff that I would not enjoy playing in a role-playing game. So so we're not specifically designing for them. We're designing for people who enjoy role-playing games who also like horror. Yeah. And so that's why I think when we went and had this experience, we were like, oh, right, we're trying to sell a new experience to people who are here to buy something that they know.
Different, type of experience. No, that makes sense. That does make sense. So I wanted to ask you about. So like I said, I absolutely love Dread. One of the things that is not my favorite aspect of the game that we have kind of slightly hacked is actually the character creation system. So I wanted to ask you about the character creation system, the questionnaire. Because what we've done in my group, and I've learned this from I didn't come up with this, I learned this from other people, was rather than doing the written, and I have done the pre-written questionnaires for like my game club, but like if it's like me and my group of players that I play with regularly, we never do the pre-written questionnaire. the GM basically freeform asks questions of the players and kind of goes from person to person, and we all kind of build on each other's, like it's kind of a cooperative experience.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, my question is just like where the questionnaire came from, like how, when, like the origins of the questionnaire as character system.
Well, okay. But before I get into
Yeah.
that, I just want to say that that's how I do it now too.
Really?
Yeah. Well, so let's go into the origins
Yeah,
here.
sure.
So that comes from my original degree in is a Bachelor of Arts in English with an emphasis in creative writing. So I took a lot of creative writing courses, and when we were designing Dread, I was coming to the end of that, end of my college years where I got kicked out of college at one point. So I got a 4-year degree in about 8 years. So that was fun. That was enjoyable. And it's nothing I'm like embarrassed about or anything like that. But although at the time I absolutely was.
Sure.
I was finishing up those 8 years that it took to do the 4-year degree when we were designing Dread. And roughly around that time, like a little bit before that, we had done this exercise in the class where we were answering questions like that for characters in our stories. And I remember there was a question specifically that was a lot of the questions, very mundane questions. Like the idea of the exercise was to get into your character's head. And specifically the idea for this creative writing exercise was to answer these questions and then have that inform the story without answering the questions in the story. And two things kind of came out of that. One of the questions was, what disease do you fear most? And I saw that as like, again, this is from the character's point of view. I kept going over the different versions of that and realizing how much it changed how I perceived the character. And then, so that felt really powerful to me. I was like, this is really neat. Like, maybe I'll just ask this question about all my characters from here on out. This very specific question. But then what happened was when we started doing the writing exercises and then bringing them into the class, people couldn't resist reincorporating their questions into it. Like it just was, you were just compelled to do so. So that also to me appeared very powerful. I was like, okay, this is, so when we wanted to do Dread without numbers, I thought these questions would be a way to do it. We want people to get invested in the characters. Answering a bunch of questions about the characters is going to do that. We want to produce material that the GM might be able to use. Again, this is definitely going to do that. We also want to have an idea of the character, like a shared understanding of what the character's capabilities are. And again, you could do that through these questions. So we had the bespoke character, the first one was like 100 questions that everyone, like I said, we never used it. We were like, here you go, fill this out and that's your character. And we're like, whoa, okay, hold up. And then we were doing like picking some that we wanted to answer, and then we were rolling, and then we settled on if you're going to write a scenario, write these bespoke character questionnaires. And in the beginning, that was something that like we felt was a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but at the time we thought it was like, that is, and then I had to write like 30 of them, like I had to write them for every scenario, and we would go to all these conventions and we'd run all these different scenarios at the conventions, because we had some people that wanted to be in more than one scenario. So you'd have to provide, and you're 6 players, 12 unique questions per player. That's 72 questions right there. You do that for 5 different scenarios. You're like, oh, it's the worst. It was so much work leading up. Now, once you had done that work, almost all of your scenarios done. Like so the that's fine. Like you still have like an outline of like how you expect things to go if the characters aren't involved, or
Sure.
don't mess it up or whatever. But uh what ended up happening is that I just got to the point where I couldn't focus all my time on Dread. I had other games that I was working on and putting out. And so I refined this Dread scenario that I would do that was just this quick thing that I could sit down with a bunch of people. And it's the same thing you were saying. I would just give them, I think I've said before, it's like zombies, because we're in a convention hall. So everyone at this point knows what a zombie apocalypse is going to look like or has a good idea of it. And here are the tropes I'm going to do, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm going to ask you a question, and I point to one of them. And then once I ask that question, a leading question of them, I have them ask someone else a question, and we go around. We just do that like twice, because we just, you have to get to the thing before, because I'm trying to run a demo in like a half hour. So I'm just like, let's go.
Yeah.
And that pans out. Like that ends up becoming how I do question like character creation in like Wolfspell or Vast and Starlit or other games that I've designed, because I just like I love the questions, but the labor you have to put in to coming up with those unique questionnaires. It's funny. I was just talking to a friend of mine about the possibility of we're thinking about making a feeding it to an AI and seeing if I can get an AI to start randomly generating Dread questions and questionnaires.
Yeah.
Which because it is, I think that is like the most labor intensive part of the game, and I do know that people enjoy it. Like I know people, and I did certainly in the beginning. I was like, "Ooh, wait till they read this one. Wait till I find a way to move that, get that into the story." But in the end, it just you could still get sort of the same highs out of spontaneously generating the questions by having people just come up with them and ask them of each other, and people will ask questions that you never think to ask too. So It's just in the same way that you never expect all the answers. You can't, yeah.
So I feel like it's just like a different type of experience, right? Like there is something like, so if the style of GMing it is going to be that like, okay, I've pre-written these questions and like I'm going to intentionally look for the answers to match the scenario I have brought to the table, where so like the questionnaires are part of the scenario building. Like that's one way of approaching, I think, running. It's just different than sort of like the more spontaneous cooperative style. And I think probably depending on just how someone's brain works, one might be more easy or appealing to them than the other.
There's the other aspect to this is that in issue 10 of Worlds Without Master, I did a Dread style game called the Dread Gate of Duke Voku, and I'm pronouncing like 6 words wrong in that title. But that one is the Dread. It was my sort of like, I'm going to do sword and sorcery horror. There's several sword and sorcery horror authors that I wanted to kind of like get into the realm of what they were doing. I'm going to use Dread, but I'm going to use a version of Dread that I think would exist if Dread was invented after Apocalypse World. So things are presented as moves, and but you're still using the tower and all that. And the scenario in that one is very, very locked in. You are playing these. There are 6 companions to Duke Voku. They're very specific, the companions, and they are like adventurers and scholars and things like that who go out and do his bidding. They have submitted to his will mystically. Like he says, "You're going to be under my gauge. I will cast a spell upon you, and you will not be able to deny me. Do you want that?" And they're like, "Yeah, this seems like the thing to do," for whatever reason. Like, and then you go out and you do his bidding, and what follows from there is, monsters and whatnot. But the six companions each have questionnaires just like you would have in Dread. There's, I think, 7 questions in each one instead of 13. With the 7th being, what's your name? But one of the things I just love about this game, because I've run quite a few demos of this game as well, is having these sets of questionnaires and seeing how vastly different each player, what they bring to these open questions.
Yeah.
Like the each character has an epithet. So it's like, one is the loathed, which everyone dislikes. There's the God, I can't off the top of my head remember the names of them, but like I just tell them the epithets, like, here's the loathed, here's the one with the silvery tongue, and here's which one do you want? And then they get it and they sit down and then they start reading through them, and I just it's a fun experience because of what's hidden in there. But yeah, that's a one shot. Like that's a like I did that. I wrote those once. I didn't have to write them over and over again. So yeah.
So I am curious, like outside of the con experience where you have to run a scenario in 45 minutes or whatever. So actually, and before I ask this question, if people do have questions in the chat, feel free to drop them. But I did farm out some questions to my friends who like Dread. Like, what would you ask Epidiah if you could have the chance? Because I'm going to. So, and one of the questions my friend who's run a lot of Dread asked was like, what you think this sort of, how long should a game of Dread ideally last? Like, what do you think is there a sweet spot for how long the game should last? Because we've had I could tell you a little bit about how long some of our games have lasted, but.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it depends, but outside of a con scenario, right? Like where I'm not trying to just get through it as fast as possible, which is a bad characterization. I do enjoy running these demos, and I'm not trying to. It's just that I have to get through them fast as possible. I need to get the game in front of more people.
Sure.
But outside of it, like, well, there's a thing, like in conventions, they tend to bracket out 4 hours at a time for games, roughly. And I think nowadays they sometimes split those up, but like we just naturally started, indie game designers around the early aughts just naturally started designing games that had arcs that completed in 4 hours, because that was what you had to do it in. And I think that, like, in general, that's after you've had your time of just sitting down and getting to meet everyone and introducing the characters. If it goes over 4 hours, then it gets a little I don't know. Actually, I don't know. 4 hours just seems to be the one that I designed for. And we did, like, I think in the book we say you should be making a pull every 5 minutes or something like that, but not like that's an on average thing. It's over the course of your whole game, and that's as close as it gets to having like a mathematical need for something, right? Like if you do that every 5 minutes for 4 hours, you're going to make 48 pulls. And we found that the tower in all of our just trials with the tower went down at least one time after about 45 pulls, although you could go beyond that and whatnot. So that was just our way of kind of like helping you pace it or whatever. But I've played longer than 4 hours. I've played multi-session single scenario dreads that I really enjoy. Although it's sometimes hard to carry the tension. Like you really have to be like, okay, that's the end of a chapter. When we come back, we're going to, reset it, whatnot.
We've had some games last a very long time, and we've had some games where like it just because of like really epic pulling and like really like deliberate pullers, like where it's just like really it just took way longer than we would have expected for the tower to fall. And we've actually, I think, had even sessions where like games where we ended up not like, I think we ended up just sort of like ending the story because we ran out of time. Like it's like it's 1 a.m. Maybe nobody's even died, but like they all survived because like we never.
Oh, congrats!
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, I know. I found that it tends to go longer than I expect it to. Pretty much every time I played, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but like whenever we've played, like unless it's been like at the game club where I need to kind of really push people to pull a lot so that like the game does end in time. If we're just like in a free form environment where it doesn't matter when the game ends, like I've noticed our games tend to go a long time. And I don't know if that's just like hesitancy on the GM's part to like force pulls as often as maybe would be helpful, or like maybe it's just figuring out that pacing. I don't know. It's tough. But
it's a play style thing, right? Like if people are having fun, if it becomes a problem, then I would suggest leaning on it a little bit.
And that's a good point about people are having fun. Like, like it doesn't really matter, right? Ultimately. Yeah. There is a question in the chat that says, what are your thoughts on the game Starcrossed?
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it in and of itself for its design. It's a great game. I'm going to just put that out there. Sure. But I have a very special, so I told Alex that like I was so happy to no longer be the Jenga game designer. if somebody else was using it, then I think it's great, and it's a great fit for the genre, right? Like the type of stories that Starcross is telling are scarier than horror stories. So it deserves it's a very good fit for it. Yeah.
Yeah. I love Starcrossed. Alex was actually the first guest on this show.
Oh, nice.
When it launched in April. Alex was my first guest. And in part, this show existing is because of conversations I had with Alex for a different show, and found out like while we were talking that she had like a religious background, like had a religious side to her education and things like that. And then I was like, man, I'd really like to do a TTRPG talk show where I talk about religion with people, which isn't what we always do on the show now, right. but it was sort of the origin of Holy Happy Hour was that kind. So years later, it came into fruition, and Alex ended up being my first guest. But Starcrossed is a fabulous game. When did you expect maybe like when you published Dread, did you expect people to hack it into other games, like to take kind of like you did with the one you mentioned in Worlds Without Master?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, now people have like there's quite a few of them out there, and I'm really happy about that. At the time, I wasn't really thinking about that size of an audience. I'm not entirely sure. What's interesting about Starcross? Well, there's a lot of interesting things. I shouldn't say this, but it's what's I guess funny or ironic about Starcross is that like my wife is Emily Care Boss, who wrote the Romance trilogy. We met because she published Breaking the Ice, a game about falling in love, or specifically going on the first 3 dates of a relationship. At roughly the same time I wrote Dread. And so I'm not saying that Starcross is these two games smashed together, but when you take those genres and you like, it was so weird that we didn't like it had like that oh, of course this had like this should have been a thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how. I'm not thinking back on it. I don't know what my expectations were. When Dread came out, there were, I think I told the story about like, I think we sold 30 copies at Gen Con, which was a massive success by indie standard. Well, not massive, but it was like, that was considered a good, and it wasn't too bad since we had the just table space on a booth that was just selling t-shirts. Like it wasn't like in with other game designers or whatever. I did not expect Dread to become the success that it has become. Like I just didn't. I honestly, going into it, didn't think you could self-publish a role-playing game. I thought that was probably a bad idea. It's become considerably easier to do so with less risk these days, or even easier to do so with a lot more risk if you're not cautious.
Right.
But at the time, I had spent, I had a degree in creative writing, and they just spent a lot of time telling you that self-publishing was a scam, right?
Sure.
Like it was vanity presses and whatnot. And it was, I mean, like there were plenty of people out there willing to take your money and then ship you books, your own book back to you. But so those are the fears that I was living with. And then when it came out, and then people bought it at the convention, I thought, wow, that's really great. And then there was like 6 months of nothing, just, but this is before Twitter. This is before, I just didn't know what happened next. I didn't know, like, did the industry call me up and say, hello and welcome to the industry? But right. Like, like I didn't know what happened next or whatever. Yeah. And then there was like a review of it on, where was it? There was a review of it. I remember that showing up. And then Kevin Kelp, who is big on the EN World website, just started a thread about it, just talking about how much he enjoyed the game. And that was when I was like, oh, people are playing it. People are like that, like, and I knew people were playing it. Like people, like one of the first people to buy it was someone who had been playing the game. But that was like my first time of like, oh, right. Now people have to play it. And how often do you play a game right when you get home from Gen Con? You often it sits on your shelf and for a while you get people. And then we had the following year, the Ennies, they gave us the Judge's Choice Award, and that was just blew me away, just absolutely. And it really also was like, in some ways, a bad thing to happen. Like you want your next thing to be better than the thing you just did. Like that's the general trend in life, and in any, like, even if the thing is just making a bowl of ramen for lunch, like you want your next bowl of ramen to be better than the one you just had, not because the one you just had was bad, but just why not? Why wouldn't you want the next, and that was sort of like, here you go, this is your big hit, now follow it up. And
right.
Like, oh no, how?
Yeah.
Like what? Oh, that's miserable. But that was years ago. I'm out of it now. I'm good.
Like you've broken out of the expectation.
Yeah. I mean, like the game I followed it up with was Time and Temp, which you might not have heard of. I don't think anyone really knows about it. Although I see that it sells a copy every couple of months or so. Which was a time travel game, comedy game that used something akin to Sudoku in the same way that Dread uses Jenga. And it's a game that I spent a lot of time and effort to put together and put out. And, a bunch of people bought it all when it first came out, and then it just kind of languished into obscurity. But I have been able to do things, other things since then, and I've got this wonderful Wolf Spell. Exactly. I've got Swords Without Master and Vast and Starlit and other projects on my. I'm no longer like. I think what it was is at the time it was just like, here's a thing that's doing this. Are they all going to do this? And if they aren't, was it a fluke? And now I'm no longer. Now I just let the games be what they are. Like I can sometimes tell if I'm designing one where I'm like, I'm designing this game for me and no one else. So enjoy it, Epi, because this is the best it gets. And then there's other ones where I'm like, oh, people are going to dig this. This is a thing that people are going to like.
Yeah.
So.
Well, so I'm going to ask you to refer people to where they can buy, Worlds Without Masters, other
Oh
games
yeah.
like this. But before that, I'll say that like I had a list of stuff to ask you about, like, and including stuff about Dread that I only scratched the surface of, which always seems to happen on this show. But like even more so because I thought, well, we'll talk about, really wanted to talk about death in games. And I wanted to talk about like maybe get a little existential, which we ran out of time, so we didn't get to do here on this
I'm
All
a
Saints Day.
rambler. I
No,
apologize
it's
for
not your
that, but
fault. It's
yeah,
that's. I mean, it's certainly what you want on a show like this. Like, I want to have a
yeah.
conversation that we, like you want to run out of time and be like, oh man. But like, I also scratched the surface of my own list of questions. But, yeah. So where can folks buy? Where can folks find you online? Where can folks buy your games?
Right.
Support you, Patreon, all that stuff.
I'm Epidiah, Epidiah on Twitter, and I honestly, if you search that, I think I'm the only one you'll ever find. My main website is dig1000holes.com. That's DIG and then the number 1000 and then holes.com. And that is, I'm actually working on I'm teaching myself how to code so I can build a different website. And then Worlds Without Master, which is the worlds is plural, the master is singular. Don't play around with plurals. If you ever have to do I keep making mistakes when I name things, but worldswithoutmaster.com is where you can get the different issues of Worlds Without Master. All but one of them has a complete game in it. I think one of them has a supplement to the first game, the game that was in the first issue. They're cheap. They're like $4.99, I think, something like that. Otherwise, you can find me on Itch. You can find me on Drive-Thru. You can find me. I have like a Gumroad store. I tried to get on all of them because you never know which one's going to swerve and make a very poor decision for your business, because your business is so tiny compared to what they're doing. So,
yeah. At Patreon, you have a Patreon too, right?
Yeah, the Patreon right now is not. It's been a couple years now since I put out an issue of Worlds. I'm going to do like a relaunch. So I think they have like a policy where if it stands idle for so long, they put it on like they mothball it. Gotcha. So that's where it is right now.
Gotcha. But these other things, I will find. I'll get the links. I dropped a couple links in the chat, and I will drop links in the show notes for this once it's up live for people. But
appreciate that.
Thank you for taking the time to come on Holy Happy Hour.
This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Epidiah to stay here in our digital green room, aka Zoom chat, and I'm going to switch back to just me for you all for the end of the show here. So, like I said, huge thanks to Epidiah for coming on the show, for taking the time. Such an honor for me to be able to like I said, scratch the surface of my dread questions, but we'll maybe there you go. So, all right, so end of the show here, folks. Please don't forget to hit the follow button, or consider subscribing to my channel for more Holy Happy Hour content and other things I do here at That Gamer Priest. If you only caught part of tonight's show and you want to see the whole conversation with Epidiah, you'll be able to watch it on demand for a brief time here on Twitch, but you can head over to allportsopen.com to watch every episode of the show afterward, or find All Ports Open Network on YouTube. You can subscribe there, get all of our video content. Please check out our great shows on our network. We've got lots of good stuff. In fact, in just a few minutes, don't leave, because we're going to go raid right into a brand new game, brand new campaign that's launching tonight on the All Ports Open Network Twitch. It's going to be a pirate-themed game on the open seas, so it should be a lot of fun with our Monday crew. Huge thanks to Joshua Wise, that's my APON co-founder, who did the artwork on this stream, and everything else he does to keep our network running, which is a lot. Huge thanks to Doctor Octoroc for the use of his music you hear every week on our show. So yeah, I'm That Gamer Priest. Ben, come back next week. Same bat time, same bat hour. Earlier, Mosberg said it should be same bat hour in the chat. Same bat time, same bat hour for a. Oh no, it would be same bat hour, same bat channel. I don't know. I gotta get it right. For Delinquent Comics Takeover next Monday night, as here at 7:30 p.m. at that Gamer Priest. My Masks actual play show, Delinquent Comics, is going to take over, and so you're not gonna want to miss it. But for now, enjoy the holiest and happiest of hours, my friends. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. It's time for our APON Monday Night Crew playing a brand new pirate-themed D&D game. I'm going to put up the thanks for watching screen, but don't leave. We're going to move right into that right